compound sentence and you've changed it. And you might like that. I personally like that very much because I find it less wordy, and I like my writing to be concise because I think that's easier for my readers. So now what I would like you to do is to pause the program and combine each group of clauses to create compound complex sentences. I've supplied you with the conjunctions that I would like you to use. For example, in number 1, I'd like you to use and because. So you're using a coordinating conjunction and a subordinating conjunction because. Then come back. Answers. Let's take a look at these. Number 1, the truck broke down and the family walked 10 miles to the nearest town because no one passed who could rescue them. The truck broke down is an independent clause. My next independent clause is the family walked 10 miles to the nearest town. So I've combined my 2 independent clauses with my coordinating conjunction and. That gives me my compound sentence. To make it a complex sentence, I need a dependent clause. I created that with a subordinating or dependent conjunction because. So my dependent clause I put last because no one passed who could rescue them. Again, I have an independent clause, an independent clause, and a dependent clause. That gives me my compound complex sentence. Number 2, my aunt planned to drive to work, but she couldn't until the snowplows cleared the roads. My aunt planned to drive to work is an independent clause. She couldn't is also an independent clause. It's short, but I have my subject and I have my verb. She couldn't, subject, verb. So I have 2 independent clauses joined by my coordinating conjunction, but, compound sentence. To make it compound complex, I need some subordination. And that I achieved with the dependent clause until the snowplows cleared the roads. Until is my subordinating dependent conjunction. Number 3, since Rick forgot to water the plants, they wilted. He had neglected to prune them as well. Here I'm starting off with my dependent clause. Since Rick forgot to water the plants. Since is my dependent subordinating conjunction. They wilted is my independent clause. They is my subject, wilted is my verb. He had neglected to prune them as well is also an independent clause. So now I have dependent, independent, independent. That gives me my compound complex sentence. Number 4, football is fun, but I prefer soccer because it is faster. Football is fun, independent clause. I prefer soccer, independent clause. Combine the 2 with the coordinating conjunction, but gives me my compound sentence. To make it compound complex, I need my dependent clause. I get that with because it is faster. So here I have independent, independent, dependent. Number 5, when it started to rain, the game was called off, so we went to a movie. When it started to rain is my dependent clause because of my dependent conjunction when. The game was called off is independent. We went to a movie is independent. So I've got dependent, my independent, joined by the coordinating conjunction so. Number 6, because the owner refuses to sell, the land bordering the highway will not be developed and the mall will have to be built elsewhere. Because the owner refuses to sell is a dependent clause. Starts out with the subordinating conjunction because. My two independent clauses are the land bordering the highway will not be developed. There's one. The mall will have to be built elsewhere. That's two. Join them with the coordinating conjunction and. So I have dependent, independent, independent. So now what is an effective sentence? Well, effective sentences have four main qualities. They are correct, free from errors. They are clear, as I mentioned earlier. They are concise, as I said, concise meaning they are to the point. And they are varied, which means you would use some simple, some compound, some complex, and perhaps a few compound, complex as well. Let's start with correct. You know that your sentences have to be correct to communicate your meaning clearly. Correct sentences don't have any mistakes in form, punctuation, capitalization, or modifier placement. Let's start with form. Correct sentences are complete. They do not have any parts missing. A part missing creates a fragment. A fragment may be missing your subject or your verb, or may not express a complete thought. The sentences that we looked at earlier about presidents were fragments because they were missing parts, subjects, verbs, or complete thoughts. A run-on is when you take two independent clauses, two complete sentences, and you run them together without adding one of the coordinating conjunctions, fanboys, or without adding a semicolon. A comma splice is a run-on that uses a comma instead of a semicolon. So fragments, run-ons, and comma splices are examples of sentence errors. However, you are allowed to use fragments when you write dialogue in your narratives, because people very often speak in fragments, and so you want to capture that. That'll be obvious in your writing because you'll set off your fragments with quotation marks. Other than that, however, you would want to avoid using fragments in your writing. So now what I would like you to do is to pause the program and complete each of these sentences in your study guide. Then come back. Here are some possible answers. The good news is that animals help reduce blood pressure and signs of stress. What I've done there is I have corrected the fragment. The second one is also a fragment. Here's my correction. Parents who allow their children to have pets know that children can become more loving and responsible as a result. Number 3 is a run-on. Here's my correction. A diamond is cut with special grinding wheels, and diamond dust is used as an abrasive. Your answers might be a little bit different from mine, but as long as your sentences are correct and complete, it's fine. So now what I would like you to do is pause the program and identify and correct each sentence error. Then come back. Number 1, flowers that are freshly cut. Well, that makes no sense. What about flowers that are freshly cut? So I've got to add something to make that a complete thought. I could say flowers that are freshly cut do not last long, or flowers that are freshly cut smell so nice in the house, or flowers that are freshly cut make me sneeze. As long as I've got the rest of that sentence, I'm okay. So I've taken my fragment, I've taken my dependent clause, and made it into an independent clause. Number 2, bees and wasps enable crops to grow. Caterpillars and beetles can devour these crops. Well, this is obviously a run-on because I've got two independent clauses that are run together, that are pushed together without the correct punctuation. Remember, to correct a run-on, you use one of the fanboys, one of the coordinating conjunctions, or you use a semicolon. That's the easiest fix. You can also correct a run-on by making it into two independent clauses, put a period between them. You can also correct a run-on by making one of those clauses, one of those independent clauses, into a dependent clause, and then creating a complex sentence. I'm going to try it a few different ways. I'm going to say, let's do it with a coordinating conjunction. Bees and wasps enable crops to grow, comma, but caterpillars and beetles can devour these crops. I like the but. I like the contrast. To me, it makes a lot of sense. I could have put a period there, but that would have made a rather choppy sentence, and it wouldn't have had as much logic to it. I could also put a semicolon there if I had wanted to, but I like it with the but because I like to show result. The second part of the sentence now explains the first part of the sentence. Number 3, the jar on top of the refrigerator. Well, what about the jar on top of the refrigerator? I'm missing something that happens to that jar. I have my subject, the jar, but I have no predicate. So I've got to add a predicate to take this fragment and make it into an independent clause, a complete sentence. The jar on top of the refrigerator is likely to fall off. I'll use my verb is, and I'll complete my thought. Now it's an independent clause. Next one, number 4. Insects are the most varied creatures on Earth. They share certain common features. Well, that's a run-on because I have two independent clauses pushed together. The first one is insects are the most varied creatures on Earth. The second one is they share certain common features. I've already tried some different variations. I'm going to try something a little bit different here. I'm going to make it into a complex sentence. I'll start with a dependent clause. Even though insects are the most varied creatures on Earth, they share certain common features. I like that a lot because now the even though they're varied makes a lot of sense when I combine it with the common features. So I chose that not only because it was a little bit different, I wanted to illustrate a point, but also because it makes the most logical sense considering what it is I want to convey. Next one. While we were at the lake swimming, well, what happened while we were at the lake swimming? I don't know. I have only a dependent clause. I have the word